Welcome to the Archetypal Mosaic. This is Mikhail Tank. Today's extra special guest is Russell Beck, author, historian, and art gallery director in New Zealand. We're going to be speaking about the most precious material there, which is greenstone, otherwise known as nephrite, and mostly comes from South Island. Welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Now, tell me, please, what interested you in nephrite, in New Zealand nephrite originally?
Roughly 1957, 58, I visited a little beach in Milford Sound where a material called bowenite occurs that looks very like nephrite, but it isn't. And it was also used by Maori. And I collected some little pebbles off the beach, and that sparked my interest.
Now, you have a book out, which is the top book in the subject, and it's simply called, how do you pronounce the word Pounamu properly?
Pounamu.
Pounamu. It's called Pounamu, Russell Beck, with Micah Mason and Andries Epps. This book is published by Penguin Viking, and this is in its... Which edition is this in? The current beautiful table coffee book.
Pardon, I didn't just catch that. What is the... I didn't catch what you asked.
Yes, which edition is this? The coffee table book that you...
Second edition. Second edition.
Okay. Originally you published a book like this back in the 70s, right?
Yes, I've done 5 altogether and just kept updating them.
Wonderful. Well, the new book, which is very hard to get here in the States, it's called The Jade of New Zealand, Pounamu. Now, for people who may not know, what is the concept of mana in New Zealand culture?
I don't understand that question. What is the what?
The concept of mana energy.
Mana?
Yes.
Mana is the Maori appreciation of things precious. If it has mana, it is precious.
And what makes Pounamu precious?
Well, it's very useful. It's not only occurs in New Zealand, it occurs in something like 20 other countries. And where the indigenous cultures recognised it, they used it for tools, and then later for adornments or even weapons. It is an incredibly tough material. In other words, it's very durable, so that it makes an excellent tool. It's not that hard that you can't make it, and then when it's made, it's almost indestructible. So a very useful material for a stone-based culture. And that's probably what kicked off the appreciation. There was nothing better.
And aside from its utilitarian uses, it is also the primary stone for jewelry and cultural beauty. Yes?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes, it is.
If you can discuss...
Well, it has a lot of properties that are attractive. Like, it's translucent. It transmits light. And it's very soft to the feel. Like, it's a nice thing to handle. And it's also beautiful colours. So, it's all shades of green and right up into white and browns. Just depends where the stone is from.
In a way, though, some of these colors that come from New Zealand are only from New Zealand. Is that right? Like, for example, what's known as flower jade. It doesn't really occur anywhere else, or does it?
Well, it probably does. It's just that flower jade is just where the stone has been buried in glacial deposits for thousands of years. And the oxidization process has begun to eat away at the stone. And if there's any slight little cracks or indentations, it works away on those, and you end up with stone still remaining green, but you have these sort of orangish or yellowish patterns developing throughout the stone that people here call flower jade.
Is there, out of the many, many variations of the nephrite that occurs in New Zealand, for example, Inanga, right, Kawakawa, which...
They're standard colours that Maori gave names to, but there's no two stones the same. So you can get all multiple variations of colour and texture.
But some of them carry...
You get it's like marble. You get a lot of patterns all through it, and you won't get the same pattern repeated.
Now, in some places it says that Inanga, which is very milky jade, and in other places it says flower jade, which is the one we were just discussing that has streaks of gold and yellow like leaves. They've been considered the rarest and most valuable at different times. How does that change, and what's considered most valuable now?
Well, it's a matter of personal taste. Some people, because the early Europeans who arrived here roughly 200 years ago, they preferred the nice green colour. They called the stone greenstone, whereas Maori preferred the inanga, which is the pale green. And it just depends on what your taste is as to what is the preferred colour. I don't think there's any one type that is more precious than the other. It just depends who wants it.
Now
I prefer the inanga variety because to me it has more character.
And that's the milky one?
Yes.
Now
it's a greyish green.
Now,
very pale greyish green.
There are incredible artisans in New Zealand who carve beautiful heitoki and other gorgeous symbols. Now, some of my favorites, pieces I own, are by Nathan Jerry and Arapa Wata. Would you talk about some of the artisans that create some of these incredible things, and also the symbolism of the patterns used?
There's a lot of really good carvers in the country. I don't want to name them all, but some new carvers. There's some young Maori carvers now doing very nice work, and there's a lot of European carvers doing excellent work. There's the carving scene here has really only started since around about the 1970s, 80s. Prior to that, all the jewellery that was offered was cabochons or ring stones or little earrings and things like that. Very, very sort of almost Victorian in design. Whereas a group of carvers started working on the west coast. Peter Hewson was probably one of the first people to start carving in more traditional designs, or leaning on the Maori culture to provide his motifs in his carvings. Then he developed that further, and lots of other carvers started up around about the same time.
Now, is it true that a long time ago, most of the carvings that were sold or given in New Zealand were actually created by German artisans in Germany?
Before 1860s, or round about the time when gold was being discovered on the west coast, and they were finding boulders of nephrite in amongst the gold, it was shipped to Germany, and the German lapidaries at Ida Oberstein, they carved it into copies of tikis. Some weren't that great, and they were sold back here in New Zealand, but then later lapidary workshops started here, and it all finished as far as going to Germany when the First World War began, 1914.
And now, you know, there's a lot of people who buy New Zealand nephrite pieces, which are actually not from... Most of the stones that they buy from outside dealers are actually not even New Zealand stone at all. It's Canadian and other jade, which, for me, out of nephrite.
Well, the stone is in short supply, and it always has been. And the demand is such that a lot of carvers now are carving imported stone. They declare it's imported stone. They don't try and sell it as New Zealand stone. And what you're buying really is the craftsmanship. And that's the important part.
And then for those listening who are interested in authentic New Zealand greenstone, there is a company or a gathering, the Guardians. I don't know the pronunciation. Ngai Tahu. How do you say that correctly?
Ngai Tahu. Yeah.
And
that is the Maori. That is the Maori tribe that has the ownership of all the Pounamu.
And so the stone that they sell and they authorize is original New Zealand greenstone from New Zealand.
Yes, definitely. They have a process there where the artists become registered, and every piece of the stone is accounted for. Yep.
So that is really. I'm sorry?
It is a good scheme.
Yes, and that is something for our audience if you're interested in true, not only carved by New Zealand artisans, but also the actual stone coming from there, which is very important to me. Definitely go through the official Guardians if you can. And do some research on your own. There are additional sellers who provide excellent quality stuff, including Acton Park, from my personal experience. Now, your book, again, there's the coffee table book called The Jade of New Zealand Pounamu, which is an exquisite, colorful, gorgeous book, again, released by Penguin Viking, available in Australia and New Zealand, not really here in the U.S., very hard to find around the world. I have one sitting right in front of me. I also have the very first edition you published. And a lot has happened in these years between the time you first started and between the time this gorgeous coffee table book came out a few years back. I mean, all of the protective elements and all of the legal things that have happened in order to protect the culture and protect the stone. Can you talk about that?
Yes, it's quite a while. The first book was 1970. And the one you're talking about, I think, was 2010. I have actually produced a smaller book, 2012, and it's just a condensed version of the big one. It's now out of print. But it's been a slow process, but the stone was handed back by the New Zealand government to the Ngāi Tahu tribe. That's the main tribe in the South Island. And they manage the resource.
And for our listeners who may not know the difference, because jade, when people see jade, you know, when people go to Chinatown here in San Francisco, a lot of the jade they see is pretty much, not really jade. But jade is two elements, two minerals, which is jadeite and nephrite. Nephrite is the one we're talking about in New Zealand, and jadeite is the best, comes from Burma. Now, has there ever been jadeite in New Zealand?
No, not yet. We haven't found any. Jadeite is a totally different mineral, different chemistry completely, and whereas nephrite is probably the one that was used much earlier than jadeite.
Now, in a lot of the world,
so it goes back thousands of years, whereas the use of jadeite in China was only from around about the 1700s on. The interesting thing, though, in Japan, on the west coast of Japan, they have jadeite there, and they also have nephrite. And the early Jomon culture that was there thousands of years ago, they used both. And that's the only case that's happened that I know of. But the nephrite would have been treasured more for its durability for tools, whereas the jadeite was used more for ornaments and decorative pieces.
Now, a few more questions before we complete our mini interview with the incredible...
Well, I'll have to go now. My son's arrived, so...
Okay, well, thank you for being on the show.
Yes, okay.
Have a wonderful day.
Righto, bye.
Bye-bye. We've been speaking with the incredible author, Russell Beck. I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about the stone before I finish the recording, because nephrite and jadeite have been some of my favorite creations from the world, from the earth. Jadeite came to be known much later, and the best kind comes from Burma, whereas nephrite, as Russell spoke about, comes from multiple locations, and some of the most beautiful comes from New Zealand. This book that I'm holding, I'd like to share with you a little bit about it, because it's really, really something. It has a total of, let's see, how many pages? Approximately 250 pages, with incredible photographs, with incredible history, with the explanations between the different structures in both jadeite and nephrite. Also, as Mr. Beck discussed, bonite was also included in the original greenstone value system back in the day, but now more so than ever, nephrite is appreciated the most in the country, and there's many variations of the colors, and they're all noted in the book as well. It was a true pleasure to speak with Mr. Beck. I wish him well, and it was a short interview, but short and sweet. One of those impromptu interviews, as we recently had with Hollywood icon Angeline, which you can hear also on the Archetypal Mosaic. So there's basically a couple of different kinds of interviews. There's the pre-planned, and then there's the impromptu. So please know there's a difference. Enjoy, and enjoy the other episodes as well. Signing out, and well wishes.